Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Paul. Today I'm joined by my friend Luke. We were having a conversation online the other day that I thought that would be a pretty good conversation for a video. We were discussing if we thought the character or the personality of Japanese people is more like the British, like Luke is from the UK, or like Americans, I'm from the US. So we had some ideas that we came up with, but you seem to be of the opinion that they're more American than British. Why is that?
I do. Well, first of all, I'm not. These are all sweeping generalisations, which I tend to avoid sweeping generalisations if I can.
But they're fun.
They are there. So for the purpose of the thought experiment.
Okay.
I do. I think there's more similarities between Japanese and Americans than Japanese and British, which I think is kind of contrary to the popular kind of viewpoint.
Yeah, I have heard a lot of Japanese themselves claim like, oh yeah, we kind of feel an affinity towards British people in terms of character, although obviously they're more used to American English just because they have greater exposure to that. But,
yeah.
But what I've heard, for example, in terms of actual claims that have been made, is that the Japanese are more like the British because British don't usually, loudly proclaim how good they are at something. It's kind of a low-key humbleness and not wanting to sound like you're tooting your own horn about something, which Americans could be very, very, very good at doing. So.
Yeah, and I would broadly agree with that. I think there is a bit more kind of self-deprecation amongst British people compared to Americans. And I think that is something that is shared with Japan. Yeah, I would agree with that characterization. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what is the one that makes you, or what is an example that makes you think they're more like Americans?
I've got a couple. The one that we kind of started to talk about online is the idea of earnestness.
Okay.
Which I couldn't explain to you very well, but by earnestness I mean kind of taking yourself seriously, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I caught what you're meaning when we were talking about it. It's like Americans take themselves seriously, and I think it's actually even tied to that. I'm going to self promote, and I know I'm really good at this, and I'm going to try hard at being good at this, whereas British like to downplay everything.
Yeah,
right?
And there's a kind of inner kind of cynicism in there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I gave the example of like Obama coming on the stage and spouting, his kind of over earnest "yes we can" stuff. It would not wash in the UK. He'd be laughed off the stage. Come off it, mate. Sit down, sunshine.
What would the Obama slogan be in the UK then? Would be like, maybe we can make it work.
Probably. Possibly.
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff wouldn't work. Also, I think it's tied to the kind of, UK has the kind of the banter culture, which America doesn't. That's why there's no panel shows, in America, like there are on like UK TV. Sure. And I think Japan kind of shares that kind of aspect to it as well. And it's this whole idea of like it's a lack of cynicism, which I really love about Japan.
Yeah.
And but it's definitely, and I think that's shared with America.
Cynicism and sarcasm too. Not a lot of sarcasm.
No.
And contrary to popular belief, obviously there is sarcasm in Japan, but it's not anything like American sarcasm, and certainly not British kind of sarcasm. It took me, I'll give you for example, it took me a while to get used to both British and Australian colleagues in Japan. I couldn't always tell if, are you being serious or are you taking the piss? It's harder even for Americans.
The answer is we're always taking the piss.
Yeah. But only if you like someone, right? You become more straightforward if you actually don't like someone.
That's true. Yeah. And I think tied to that is this kind of like, in Japan, the whole kind of gambaro culture, or gambatte kudasai culture. And I think I remember my brother-in-law telling me this story. He went traveling around America, basically in a van for like a year.
Okay.
With my sister, and he loves football, as any good Englishman does. And they were driving past. I think it was just like some like high school kids or whatever, just having a kick around, playing soccer. And they stopped to watch because he'll watch any football he sees basically.
Okay.
And he said, I remember him telling me this like 20 years ago, and I never forgot this story. And he said he was surprised because they were so kind of nice and encouraging to each other. Like if someone kind of like, you know, missed the ball or whatever, they're like, oh, don't worry, man, next time, keep trying. You know, and if that had been like a group of like school kids in England, he would have just had the piss ripped out of him, you know, called a donkey, whatever.
Yeah.
And I think Japan's got that don't mind kind of thing, which I think is similar as well, and that's all part of that kind of earnestness and lack of cynicism, which I think they share. Is that a clear example?
Yeah, no, that's a very good example. Yeah, the kind of supportive atmosphere, and also
which I really love, and I think I don't like that UK doesn't have that. I'm not.
Yeah, cynicism,
doing it down,
wanting to tear people down a little bit.
I don't enjoy that, you know.
Well, that reminds me kind of another. I think I brought this up in our conversation the other evening, but Japan is also like America when it comes to who they put on TV and in advertisements. It's going to be like beautiful, attractive people make it onto TV, and British people won't stand for that. It's got to be like ordinary looking folks. Right?
It does. Yeah, it does. It's inauthentic. Right, and that I was going to talk about that actually. I think that's part of. I think there's a greater acceptance of fakeness in Japan and in America.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. But in a weird way, as you were telling the story about cynicism and taking the piss and like banter shows on panel shows on TV, etc. I almost get the impression though that that's also a way for British people to kind of cover what they're really thinking by being taking the piss out of something rather than saying like what they're really feeling, and that's almost a very Japanese trait, right? To actually hide what they're really thinking with the honne and tatemae culture. Like what I really think is this, but I'm going to say this instead. Like,
interesting.
I really like you as a friend, so I'm going to treat you badly if you're in the UK context.
Yeah. But I think you don't even need to be a friend to get involved in banter. Okay. I do. Yeah. But it's an interesting point, though.
Well, that's where Americans and British are more alike than Japanese, though, is that you can strike up those conversations and banter with people you don't know, which in Japan you don't talk to people you don't know in general.
No.
You don't, in the supermarket you don't strike up a conversation.
But you wouldn't in the UK either.
Oh, you wouldn't?
No.
Okay, there we go. Then the Japanese are more like the British in that respect.
That's true. But going back to the fakery, I think I'm more about the acceptance of fakery. Like it's okay to be inauthentic, you know, the kind of the American have a nice day kind of attitude. You can't really get away with that in England because you just sound ridiculous. But you know, there's kind of an acceptance in America that you know that the person doesn't mean it, and they know that they don't mean it, and everyone knows that no one means it, and it's all okay. And I think it's the same in Japan. You know, the irashaimase is the same as the have a nice day. Both of them are meaningless. Right?
How are you doing? Oh, I'm fine.
Yeah. And both of those kind of wouldn't wash in the UK because it's so inauthentic.
Okay, so authenticity is the underlying.
Yeah, idea. And I think it's more accepted here and in your country.
But what about if it's someone is authentically good at something, but you have the tall poppy syndrome and you have to tear them down? Like, you're not letting them authentically be the superstar or the beautiful person.
Again, I guess that's in that case Japan's more similar to the UK.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I think it comes back to what we were talking about at the start. The kind of the self-deprecation comes in. You know, the kind of the stereotype of the. The Oxford maths professor who says, of course I'm terrible with numbers, but that kind of self-deprecation, I guess it comes back to that,
Okay. How about work culture? Would you say Japanese work culture is more similar to American work culture or British work culture?
Definitely American.
Okay, how so?
Well, both of them work harder.
the earnestness in the job.
Earnestness in
Yeah.
the job. I mean, even just in terms of just hours, Americans work so hard. They don't take holidays
Yeah.
compared to Europeans, right?
Right.
And also,
We often laugh at the Europeans, like, oh, you're always on vacation, and then when you're not on vacation, you're on strike.
Right. So there's definitely that. Also, I think, I mean, well, at the risk of a ridiculously sweeping generalization, I think in general, both America and Japan are more conservative, small c, conservative.
Yeah.
So in that respect, I think, like, in terms, like, in the workplace in the UK, it's completely okay to swear, and it's not really acceptable in American workplaces, right?
Sure.
Or Japanese workplaces as well. You need to be very careful of your language.
And a pub lunch too. You can go and have a beer at lunchtime.
I think these days it's slightly frowned upon.
Oh,
but,
that's
I
gone
think
away.
Nowadays it is slightly frowned upon, but people
Okay.
still do.
But
Yeah.
that would never have flown in America at
really?
any point. I don't think you can't have any kind of
Yeah.
alcohol in
So-
between on breaks at the job, and certainly not in Japan either. So yeah, the American Japanese culture lines up more there. Okay.
Yeah. But the swearing's an interesting one. I had that a couple of times with American colleagues, just kind of shocked to walk into like an office and hear people, just freely, using whatever language they want. Yeah, again, but I think that comes down to a certain kind of conservatism, or
Sure.
maybe there's a more of a respect for or adulation for work culture in America that is also shared with Japan. Maybe.
Okay. I mean, that's one of those things that's a little hard for me to judge, because besides part-time jobs, I never worked in the full-time corporate or job world in America. I came to Japan at first when I was 22 or 23, so whenever we get into the kind of the work culture differences, I can only speculate based on like what I hear from friends or sitcoms on TV or something.
Right.
So, but that sounds right. It's definitely a work culture, and a almost, deification is too strong of a word, but a holding the idea of your work and your workplace as being of an utmost importance in your life. I wouldn't put America on par with Japan in that regard, but maybe compared to the UK, it's more similar.
So I used to work for the British Council in Tokyo, and yeah, as soon as I kind of went in there, I was like, oh wow, this is different. This is different from what I'd been used to the years previously.
Okay.
The more international workplaces I've been at. And when I left, again, it felt completely different. There was just like constant banter, constant, just that kind of, I don't know, just a more of a freedom, I guess.
And was it relaxed initially? Like you go in and you're already part of the
definitely,
the group.
definitely.
Okay.
And I personally prefer that style, but yeah.
And yet you chose to live in Japan.
I did. Yeah.
For things, obviously in a department where it's mostly foreign teachers, that is maybe different. But Japan, the workplace tends to be a lot more formal, hierarchical structure and that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think, formality, again, I think not only in the workplace, but I think that's another area where America and Japan are maybe more similar. Like formality with names and things. Like I watch, I'm getting my information from American films and telly and stuff, but like using like the job name, they do much more in America. Like, Coach Johnson.
Title, yeah. And
in the UK, no one would ever call like a coach, like Coach Smith or something. That wouldn't happen.
And if you go into customer service situations where you're a customer, like a university, like a restaurant or something, wait staff will refer to you as like sir or miss or something like that. And I remember an Australian coworker who's not here anymore, who was like, it was so weird to be called sir when I was in the U.S. So that formality.
Yeah, and I guess that's similar to Japan, right? The okyakusama kind of approach.
Yeah.
Can I ask, this is something I've only learned from American movies. Is it true? Is it true that if you, for example, if you have like a date and you go, when you're in school, and you go round to their house to pick them up, do you call their father sir? Is that a real thing?
Yeah, it's a real thing.
Wow.
Would you get would you get the piss taken out of you in the UK if you called the dad sir?
You would indeed. You would indeed. That's wild.
Okay. All right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, because I don't have an opinion either way. I was thinking about this and I couldn't come up with a take necessarily, whether it's more, if the Japanese are more like Americans or more like the British in this case. But when it comes to a difference in American and British culture, class plays a much greater role in the UK. Americans don't, I mean, obviously there's rich and poor and those layers, but the older idea of class doesn't have much sway in the US. In Japan, I was trying to think, is there anything equivalent, or is it just, what would your thought be on that? Japanese and class, more like the British society or American society?
Well, I think my own take on it is that all three are very similar, but they're just perceived differently. So. And
the labels are different.
Yeah. Japan and America have got just as many class differences as the UK have. They just don't think of themselves as having those differences.
So is the difference the obsession thereof? Like British are just more cognizant of it then?
I guess so. I think we're very finely attuned to it. So as soon as you meet someone, you're immediately you're working things out, from what they look like and what they sound like and what they're doing, and you're kind of placing them into different class categories.
That's very Japanese.
Which is a Japanese thing to do, but they don't use the same language of class.
Right.
Yeah.
Then it's hierarchy of like age and position. And it won't be class per se. But the feeling out of where people stand in a pecking hierarchy that sounds similar.
Sure, but if you ask them to kind of think about it and say, okay, imagine you're a construction worker from Saitama in your late 20s. What are you wearing? How do you speak? What's your hobbies? And they come up with all these kind of, class indicators, right?
Okay.
And they just don't have the language that in the UK we have to talk about it. I think maybe America's the same, doesn't use the same language to talk about things that are very obvious class differences,
And essentially boil down to the same things in each
Exactly.
Right.
But I mean, the reason for it is there's different factors, like in the US, like race is a much more important factor in class.
Okay.
So like what we call middle class problems, you call white people problems, and that's part of the history and the demographics and everything like that,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, the only other things I can think of off the top of my head that make the Japanese more like the British are superficial things, like you both drive on the left side of the road.
Right.
And there's less emphasis on absolutely perfect teeth.
As displayed by my breaking out into laughter there.
So I was taking a jab.
But they're both valid points. Yeah.
But superficial. Anything else to add?
I can't think of anything. I think our discussion shows we're erring on the towards the similarity to America, right?
Yeah. Well, there you have it. Japanese are more like Americans than British, despite the somewhat common thoughts to the contrary. Yeah.
There we go.
Okay. Well, I reckon that a good way to continue this debate is for you to leave your comments below. What do you think? Do you agree with the points that we've brought up, or do you have any additional thoughts on how the Japanese compare to the British or to the Americans? I think we've kind of tipped the debate towards Japan, or it's more like America. But let us know in the comments if you agree.
We're happy to be corrected.
Yeah. But thanks for watching this particular video. Thank you, Luke, for coming on and joining me in this. And like, subscribe, all those good things. Catch you on the next one. Any final words?
No. Can I promote my own podcast?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Really?
So yeah, and I'll put a link to it.
if by any random chance whatsoever you're interested in obscure 90s guitar music, mostly from the UK, then I do have a podcast called the Stupid and Contagious podcast, available wherever podcasts are, on YouTube. Yeah, check it out.
All right, and I will link it below. So, yeah, thanks for coming on.
Hey.
See you next time. Cheers.